Salaam alaikum, William Safir.
Walaikum salam.
All right. I believe our guest has arrived. I see his name in the queue. There he goes.
That's great.
Assalamu alaikum, how's it going?
Alaikum salam, Marwan. How are
Salam.
you, sir?
I'm
Good
fine,
to
thank
see,
you.
good to see you.
Good to see you. Good to talk to you.
All right. So for anybody else who's on the sidelines listening, I prefer that you continue to listen and not comment today. Just keep your phones muted and enjoy the conversation. Uh, the only person who will be showing up in the queue is William Safir here with us. And our guest today is Marwan Boustany. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah, sounds good to me.
All right. So I'm going to let you take the talking stick and do whatever it is you do, whatever your presentation is, whatever you want us to know that you know. And at the end of your presentation, we're looking at going maybe about an hour or so if you have the time.
Okay.
Oh,
So I perhaps interpreted this as going to be just a chat, not a presentation. So I haven't prepared a presentation,
it
but
can listen, if Trump and the other guy can chat,
yeah. So
certainly we can chat.
I'm happy. So I'm going to share essentially the foundations of the thinking and the approach and background, and then
Yes.
please jump in with comments, criticisms, questions, whatever you like. It'd be
Great.
great to have it as a conversation after the initial
Yeah,
kind of setting of the
absolutely.
stage.
Absolutely. No problem. Yep.
All right. So let me give you some background on how I got into the work that I'm trying to do at the moment. So my background is kind of a mix. I had a Christian mother. My father was Muslim. Wasn't really brought up very much religiously. It just kind of was something in the background.
Mm.
And so I didn't really identify or fit in with any particular group. Then when I was like in the 16, 17, I started to look into the topic, but looking at it from one perspective, not necessarily being indoctrinated or taught about it. I'm from a very early age. When I looked into it, I kind of dove in like a lot of people who would be considered converts or reverts. Although I wasn't converting from anything, it was just kind of jumping into it. And that is, I hoovered up all the information I could. And to some extent, hoovered it up in a non-critical way. I decided, let me just take what is supposed to be, and then I'll think about it. And very early on, I started to apply my critical thinking, and I decided some things just didn't seem to make sense. They didn't seem to fit together very well. And that was probably from the age of 17 or 18. And from that time until now, I've been on a journey of questioning all assumptions and taking my own path towards understanding and not relying on somebody else's words or prestige or assumed knowledge or expertise.
Gotcha.
So as part of that, I questioned a lot of things, all kind of flowing out from a Quranic perspective. So in the first place, I questioned what are supposed to be the beliefs and practices associated with the religion, and what are the relationship between the Quranic perspective on that and the global perspective on in terms of what Muslims are doing globally, Sunni or Shia. And then linked to that, I considered things like philosophy and economics, biology, and cosmology, all springing from the Quran in the sense of let me test the observational world by the foundational guidance of the Quran and see how they are linked together and how they align and so on. And so, in the same way, with the Islamic perspective of things, I came to a position whereby I only believe that the Quran is a legitimate source of religious guidance. Right and wrong expressions of reality in relation to this life and the next, and so on. And for my other investigations, for example, in the study of biology, I have come to, for quite a while, reject a lot of the secular perspective on it. For example, evolutionary theory as is applied to the history of life. So everywhere from the origin of life up until now. Happy to dive into that if it comes up
Sure.
later on. And I have similar perspectives from a cosmological perspective. My foundational view is, what are the assumptions that are being held? Do they make sense? And if you subtract those assumptions, what happens to the ideas? So I've done that with biology, cosmology, philosophy, society, various ideologies, but most focused has always been primarily the study of the Quran and religious practices and beliefs that stem therefrom. From the age of about 19 or so, or 20, I started trying to put my thoughts down into structured documents. I've not been blessed with an especially good memory, and so if I want to think about something and put information together, I need to write it down and put it in a structured way so I can reference it later on. And so over the years, I kind of would touch one topic at a time. So for example, what is the nature of guidance in the Quran, religious practices, for example, things like Salah, Hajj, and so on. But it was kind of scattered around the place and wasn't really a coherent study or an analysis.
Mhm.
And then if we skip forward to about 2016, 17, I decided that I would make the effort to construct a very complete, detailed, extensive, and well-referenced book, which presents all the information possible as it relates to the nature of guidance according to the Quran. And so that led to my first book, which is called Guidance According to the Quran, Returning the Quran to its Rightful Position as the Only Guidance. So the logic and approach of this book is, it starts with Allah. What is it in the Quran that we're told about the relationship of Allah and guidance? And also, what's the relationship between Allah and the construction of the Quran and its purpose? So that's kind of like guidance at its source. The next step then, in terms of the next chapter of the book, is the Quran itself, the very guidance that is coming from Allah. What are the characteristics that have been ascribed to it functionally?
Yeah.
You know, it has many of them. So for example, detail, clarifying, criterion, it's a balance, a reminder, guidance, truth, insight, discernment, judgment, light, and so on. I have a section for every single one of them where I lay out the Quranic references in Arabic and in English. And where it's of importance, I will do an analysis of a certain word. And if there's an argument to be made, I will reference it and discuss below the verse reference in Arabic and English. And I do that throughout the book. So that's the first chapter is Allah, the relationship between Allah and guidance. Second chapter is the Quran and the relationship with guidance. Third major chapter is the messenger. What is the relationship and role of the messenger as it relates to the transmission of that guidance? The next is Muslims and guidance. So the community that were on the receiving end of that. So I was trying to take a step-by-step analysis from the Quran as to the entire chain and purpose of the revelation. And then the one chapter after that is the previous religious communities and revelation, talking about how they treated it and also how their revelation is described in the Quran. So that kind of covers the central force of the argument. I try to be as detailed and extensive as possible. So there's many references, all in Arabic and English in there, subdivided into every single topic. So there's in excess of 800 subsections in the book, all of which are individually referenceable. And they're all interrelated. Anytime an argument is made in one section, I will reference another section where all the verses that support that argument can be found.
Wonderful.
And so the person who is reading it can check everything for themselves. In fact, because certain words are extremely key to any particular argument or set of meanings that you could derive, I've even created a dictionary section at the end of the book, where keywords, I will extract meanings from classical dictionaries, I'll do some discussion, and I'll even reference various places that it's utilized throughout the Quran. And so the reader can then test and judge everything for themselves. I am essentially removed from the equation because I've given you everything that I've used to come to this conclusion. You can accept it or reject it on its own merits. And it doesn't matter if I'm a nobody or somebody, if I know something or not, everything's there for you to check. Now, outside of these, the next section of the book, because a lot of Muslims, I guess they know something about the Hadith literature. They're familiar with the fact that it exists. It's a part of the religion. Supposedly, it's what the Prophet said. It talks about some of the things that he did. So people kind of have a surface knowledge of the Hadith. And they may be familiar with a number of Hadith here and there that sometimes they may hear in a khutbah, in a mosque, or maybe referenced in some online platform like Instagram or whatever. but really they don't know what's in there. They don't know what it actually represents and the impact it has on the interpretation of the Quran and on the derivation of practices and beliefs of the religion. And I took some time to try and read a number of books on the methodology, supposed methodology and historical collection of the Hadith literature and how they decided what was correct and incorrect and so on. It's interesting. I think there's some issues there, but the vast majority of Muslims are neither interested nor have the time to try and study that. So I decided, what would be an average person approach to be able to derive truth from falsehood in this? And so I said, okay, take it for granted that the Hadith collection methodology is a black box. They did something.
Absolutely.
On the input, a lot of stuff came. There was hearsay, fabrications, whatever, black box of the so-called methodology, and then there's an output from it. So I said, okay, forget what's in the box. Let's test it by its output. If we can find that there are consistent and problematic issues with the output, of a necessity, even without knowing what are the methods of the black box, we know there's a problem with it. And the average person can do that. And so I decided I would collect 100 examples from the so-called Sahih Hadith literature. And there could be many more, but I wanted to find the easiest stuff for the average person to read.
Yes.
And with the smallest amount of critical thinking, they would say, okay, there's obviously an issue here. And I segmented that into several sections. So I said inconsistencies between the Hadith literature, inconsistencies between the Hadith and the Quran, so supposed explanations of and reasons for revelation. So there's this so-called category called Asbab al-Nuzul, the reason or purpose for revelation. So I do an analysis of some of those and show the problems with them. And then inconsistencies between Hadith and general, one second here. Okay, yeah. Between Hadith and general logic and evidence. And then the last section was Sahih and ludicrous Hadith. Now, as I said, the purpose of putting this here is so that the average person could pick it up. Every single one of these, I put a link to where they can find it, and I put the Arabic and English in there so the person can read for themselves. And I contrast the message of these hadith with Quranic guidance wherever relevant. So people can then even compare between the two and see how they oppose. And then the final major chapter is arguments for hadith and sunnah, a presentation of and response to their major arguments. And here I try to find what are the strongest arguments against what I'm proposing. I tried to check out several books and I tried to find articles, just see, where could I be wrong in this? What would be the major problem? And so I identified, let me see here, about 18 or 19 arguments, and I tried to deal with them one by one in that. Again, everything is referenced. People can check every statement, why I'm saying it and what's the Quranic basis for it. So that's kind of the quick overview of the book. The dictionary section itself has 40 sections for 40 categories of words. So people can check everything. It took a long time to just extract what's relevant. Sometimes majority of it is from Lane's lexicon,
yes.
But sometimes I would extract it from some of the other classical Arabic dictionaries, just because there really wasn't enough meat on the bone in terms of what Lane's lexicon had.
Yeah.
And I would translate that then for the person that wanted it. So that is that book. I consider it to be essentially my foundational effort in presenting the case that in fact it is only the Quran that should be considered a legitimate guidance. And I guess as we're talking about this, I'm currently probably 60–70% through my second book. And this second book is building on this. It's called Islamic Practice According to the Quran. And in here, I'm trying to deal with a whole range of topics that the average human being, like yourself and myself, would want to kind of know from the Quran. So that includes the Muslim individual. What is the guidance, or what are the elements of guidance that Allah has given for Muslim character and attributes? And I have about 50 examples of that in there, with the concept being that individuals in society are not grains of sand. They are seeds, and they need to be watered with guidance.
Yes.
And good, strong individuals with good guidance are what lead to righteous management of society. If you want to have politicians and leaders, supposedly, who are not terrible people, you need to make the general population have character and inclinations that oppose such people by default, like a knee-jerk reaction, right? And so that you have to grow from the ground up in terms of that. So that's section. I have Salah in the Quran, fasting in Ramadan, Hajj, food, modesty and dress code, marriage and the limits of sexual interaction. And in here I deal with topics like supposed slavery, concubinage, child marriage. I deal with those in detail from a Quranic perspective. Inheritance and bequeathal. I've calculated precisely how to do that from the Quran. And I have created an Excel model that a person can just put in what they need to and it calculates it perfectly every time.
Nice.
Money and riba. This is one of the most important chapters for me, where I discuss the Quranic guidance as it relates to spending and the different used. So infaq, general spending, zakah and sadaqah, I do an analysis of what do they actually mean? What is the relationship?
1 second, let me.
Yeah, what do they actually mean? So for example, I have translated sadaqah to be a charitable gift and zakah to be a charitable investment. And I kind of expand on that. And importantly, I discuss riba. Riba, what it means, and the importance of avoiding it in any Muslim society and economy. And I discuss as well the Jewish perspective on what they call marbit or tarbit or neshek, those variety of terms that they use for it, indicating how Allah's censure of them for that practice is in fact perfectly apt, because it's something that is supported in the Old Testament as well as in their Talmudic reasoning. And so I present that case and I discuss what is the meaning of riba, contrasting it with sadaqah, contrasting it with zakah, and laying down the importance of avoiding it in every way possible in society. And this is where my economic study has come in terms of understanding the foundations of financial society. Where does money come from? Why do we have such things as inflation? Why is your currency devaluing? Who's printing it? And you can link, in fact, two different types of riba. Two different types of riba you can link with that. And I discussed that in this chapter. And then next, interactions with non-Muslims, science, where I propose a Muslim philosophy of science and how you approach that. And I can contrast that with the current methodological naturalism approach to science, specifically historical sciences when it comes to biology and cosmology. Freedom and slavery, wherein I deal with the topic of, does the Quran forbid slavery? Why did Muslims practice slavery afterwards? So I deal with that in a very logical way. I take the stance that, in fact, it is not allowed, has never been allowed, Quranically, and I justify that. And then free speech. What does it actually mean? And what are the Quranic guidance as it relates to the types of speeches that should be acceptable? And what should society aim for in terms of the speech that it has? And then an overview of what I think a Muslim society should be constructed based upon the Quran. Guidance about the managers of public affairs. So I don't call these people that you put in charge leaders. They are there to serve the population in accordance with the will of Allah.
Beautiful.
They're there to be managers of public affairs, and they're there by the will of the people, and they can be removed by the will of the people. And then war and fighting. The guidance of Allah as it relates to practices of war. What is the when are you allowed to fight? You should aim for peace. How you should approach these topics. Penal law. So, for example, the different guidance as it relates to, one moment here, murder and manslaughter, public indecency or obscenity, slander, corruption in the land, theft. So those are some of the ones that are mentioned as it relates to penal law. And then something that I also deal with is day and night in the Quran, because understanding when the day ends and finishes and starts and ends are kind of linked to the practices of fasting as well as to prayer. And then the Quranic calendar. And here I take a step back and analyze and consider lunar calendar, solar calendar, lunisolar calendar. I wanted to take away the assumption, say, okay, forget about what's the current perspective. If we look at the Quran, which kind of calendar fits most organically with all the references to days and months and years? So I looked into the meanings of the various words used for year. So for example, you have am and sana and hawl and hijaj, variety of words. I analyzed all of them. And I also studied historically the months that were used, the meaning of those words, and do they relate to lunar, solar, or otherwise? And I did a very big analysis of that. My current view is that actually the correct calendar should in fact be the lunar, not solar, not lunisolar and not lunar. And I give my reasons for that. And I even identify what was the mistake that was made in order for people to end up with lunar at some point in the past. So that's kind of what's in there at the moment. I'm trying to think if there needs to be any more chapters. So I like to take my time. Like the first book took me about 4 or 5 years. And I sometimes would stop and I would go away for some months just to see, okay, let me get my assumptions out of my mind and see if something new comes to me. And sometimes I'd go back and improve something or fix something, right?
Yes.
Because you can get so stuck in your thought process, you cannot see your own assumptions, like the stick in your eye or whatever you call it, right?
Yeah.
And I'm trying to do it with this book as well, whereby I have ideas, I'll put it down, and then I'll come back to them later and say, okay, let me look at this from a critical perspective. What assumptions am I making that are not justified here? So that's this work here. I'm also I've tried to give a number of lectures and talks at the local mosque, the central mosque, whereby I'm trying to make people engage their minds as not a preference, but an absolute requirement. And I really hammer home the topic in terms of all the guidance Allah gives, not only that commanding us to think and consider and reflect and analyze, but giving the example of those in the past who haven't, by many times talking about people who rejected the truth because we are following in the footsteps of our forefathers.
Yes.
That is an anti-intellectual approach, but it's the approach that many people do by default because they want to fit to a group, they want to fit to a culture. I don't want to be different to my parents. And sometimes if you do want to be different to your parents, you're just fitting to some other group and they're also not thinking. So I always try to promote that in my talks. And one of my earlier talks was a presentation on the topic of evolution in the Quran, where I talk about it from a philosophical and logical perspective. I give a discussion of it from the fossil record and genetics, and I also link it to statements in the Quran to get people to think about it and to reflect on it. But I try to be a polymath. I think I've taken the approach that when you read the Quran and something is mentioned, I'm inclined to then go into the world and see, okay, this link, this statement has been made by the creator of the universe, and it's not here for no reason.
Yes.
It's supposed to be a guidance to direct our attention to something and to improve our action in that regard. And so I've tried to be extremely intellectual in comparing, and I'm not saying this to, please don't take this in I'm not trying to big myself up, but I'm just saying.
No, I understand. I'm not feeling that at all from you.
Yeah,
Not feeling that at all.
I'm trying to subtract emotions. I'm trying to subtract assumptions and tradition. I want it to be purely, what is it? What is the truth? I don't care about anything else. And consequently, I, perhaps like others, then end up not fitting in any groups because every group implies some accepting of something.
I know that feeling. This is wonderful. Wonderful. And
okay, so there we go. That's a brief summary. Please dive in if you have any comments or questions or whatever.
Okay. This is wonderful. And there are several other people who have joined us since we started. And so I say Salaam alaikum to you all also. And this is a very, very wonderful day for all free thinkers, at least, in the world, and not only of those who call themselves Muslims, but in the world of those who consider themselves to be true humans. I believe that the overriding theme, or at least one of them in the Quran, is the fact that he created us to be humans, whether we see that as anas, al-insan, bashar, whichever word that we're going to choose to describe our humaneness or our humanness. I find that to be a major focal point in the Quran. So it must be something that is extremely important for us to understand if we're going to understand ourselves, the rest of the world, and the greater plan that Allah has for each and every one of us, because that plan has not been divided into bits and pieces. And you Muslims, this is your lot, Jews, this is your lot. Allah has created a common lot or a common destiny for all of us if we consider ourselves to be human. The road that we choose is our discretion based on the facts in front of us, based on our upbringing, based on our culture and all of these other things. What I'm finding in our day and time right here in 2024 is that Allah is really increasing the momentum of those individual minds that are committed to finding out the truth, as you obviously are doing. These are individual commitments coming from individuals who are not stuck in the rut of conforming to what they were born into or what they were associated into. What you're saying goes way beyond what these schisms, which the Quran warns us about. Do not divide yourself into schisms. And I see the Sunni Shia divide and the Ahmadiyya and everything else that came along, even the divisions in the schools of thought, so-called schools of thought. I see them as being part and parcel of that idea that we have divided ourselves into parts and pieces. Now, it's okay to be parts and pieces if you're trying to complete a puzzle. And if you know where that particular piece fits, it's fitting into a mosaic that is still giving you an expression of what the whole picture is supposed to look like. But if you're cutting yourselves and ripping yourselves into shreds, and then I'm trying to find the pieces that go with the other piece, where does the Shiite meet the Sunni? Where does the Sunni meet the Jew? Where does the Jew meet the Christian? And all of these pieces are so scattered that none of them seem to be fitting, which suggests that we're not the same, that Allah must have elevated some of us above others to rule over others, because these others are just really knuckleheads and they're just in the way right now. So we have to figure out ways to get rid of them so that we can promote, we got to stand on them to make ourselves look higher, in other words. And individuals like yourself, and I'm sorry if I'm being long-winded, but you've inspired me with some ideas, some of which I had thought about previously and have spoken on many, many times, which is why I say I'm kind of in the same category as you. Because the way I explain what I believe I've been gifted with by Allah as explanations for my specialty is really the letters, the Arabiya, the letters that form these words and terms and verbs that we're supposed to be understanding in our own respective languages. Because I believe that those letters are actually keys. I believe that those letters represent fitra-based components of creation, that if you had to reference those fitra-based components, it would be very difficult for you to lead people astray. Why? Because we didn't create the fitra. It's that simple. If I have to keep referring to the scholars, their minds can change like we change our socks and underwear, and they have. If we have to refer to political people, so-called leaders that you said, they're not really leaders, they are managers. If they see themselves like that, then they have to admit that there's someone over them that's giving them their marching orders. So the fitra, the world of natural phenomena, the world of natural observation. And as you know, we could be looking at the same tree, but have a different perspective on what we believe that tree is. But there are certain fundamental things that we can't get away from when we say that it has to begin with a seed, right? It grows into subroot, root, body, branch, fruit, if it's a fruit tree. Those things we can't get away. We can't imagine ourselves into another reality other than what Allah has presented to us. So when I associate each one of the Arabic letters with a part, for instance, of the physical body itself, say Aleph being the spine in the back, then I can refer to the spine in the back when I'm looking at words in the Quran that begin with that letter, such as Alif. If I say Amana, Iman begins with an Aleph, then I have to study what the Aleph is in the body as a fitra construct. And if the spine is that which is holding up the structure, the spine is that which needs to be trusted to hold up the rest of the body. The spine is such that if you damage it, you could end up in a wheelchair or dead. Because if you break the spine in the wrong places, you're going to die, right? But the basic idea is that it's responsible for our uprightness. So I can factor that meaning then into the word amana by virtue of the fact that it begins with that very important letter, Aleph, an agreement, as you know, right? So once we do that, I think we're going to come closer, if not the closest, to the meanings of these Quranic words, because I'm looking at these letters as themes, not definitions. Definitions come from people who define. Themes have kind of an undergird meaning for what it is you're looking at. You know, the sun can give light and heat, but so can a candle in some cases. So there's an underlying theme to several things, several concepts, ideas that we're actually linking together. So I said all of that as the long way around saying that I'm appreciating, although I had never met you, I've only read a few things about you online, but my so-called spidey senses told me to make sure that we got in touch with you so that you can give a presentation or have a back and forth conversation with what it is we're doing here at the Nunetics Institute. Nunetics being from the letter Nun, which means seed. I believe every letter is a seed letter. It's not a root word. It doesn't begin with root words. Nothing in creation begins with a root. Everything that grows in creation begins with a seed. And I believe it's the same thing for learning the language of Al Qur'an, that it begins with an understanding of seed letters that grow to be root words that then grow to be branches of knowledge, just like the tree that Allah describes in the Qur'an, you know, the one that gives in every season, that tree. That's the Qur'an. It gives in every season. Doesn't matter whether it's wartime, peacetime, the Christians are ruling, Jews are ruling, doesn't matter who's ruling. The Quran is still the gift that keeps on giving. So just wanted to, that was kind of building up around my chest, and I needed to just get that off. But yours is so extensive, what it is that you're doing. I have to know, especially for our instructors who are listening also, and anybody else who will listen to this in the future as a replay, if you permit us to do that, that we have to know more about you. We have to know more about your work, how to get in touch with you, how to access those books. I'm going to order mine as soon as we're off the line. And this is the information that needs to now be a part of this new, some people would call it a renaissance of Quranic understanding in the world by certain people. I don't need to name any of them right now. Many of them are on YouTube. And we're forming a kind of, I'd say, I use the light word. We're forming a company, not in the strict sense, but just in the sense of people who have the same values, have basically the same outlook, and want to get there together. That's what I'm seeing happen now. And it's happening amongst many so-called races around the world. It's not the privy of any one ethnic group or anything like that. And that's what the Quran, I believe, was designed to foster. Not the superiority of the Arab, not the superiority or the denigration of the Yahud, whatever people see that as being, not the upliftment of one over the other, but the definite universality of humanity, generally speaking. So I'm happy that you're here making this presentation, and I'm going to ask if there's anyone else, beginning with William, who might have a question or comment, and then we'll get back to our brother here so he can conclude his presentation.
Can I just make some comment to what you just said?
Oh, please do. Yes, sir.
So two things. I don't want to just I don't want to skip by your statement on, I guess, your approach to Nunetics and this analysis of meanings of letters. So a number of years ago, I did come across some interesting discussion on patterns in the letters and the implication of letters. And you can sometimes, in the past, there were some grammarians who thought that actually the root letters were 2 letters, and then you grew that to 3 depending on the shade of meaning you want to get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, who knows, we could maybe break it down into 1. But I just wanted to say that it's not a topic that I have dedicated sufficient time to be able to make a valid or useful commentary on. So I'm not engaging with you simply because I don't have enough background and haven't spent enough time to engage in a fruitful way. So
Understood.
if
Yeah.
I leave that, that's the reason why. I don't want to just throw out
No
speculations
problem.
or whatever.
Yeah.
In terms of the books, so the effort I'm doing with these books is I'm doing it as a charity and as a means of negating some of my sins. We are all in need of mercy, and this is one of my ways of trying to get it by doing this as a service. So the books are going to be available on Amazon, but it's just there because sometimes people like to have a physical copy.
Yes. Sure.
However, I make them available for free for anybody who would like to have them as a digital copy. There's no problem for anybody to do it that way. And then to contact me, I put my email address in the book. And if you'd like to distribute that, it's fine. And if people have questions, comments, corrections, whatever, please feel free to get in touch. You know, I'm perfectly open to the possibility that I've made a mistake somewhere, or I've missed something, or what have you. I tried not to, but I'm not assuming that it's perfect. So, but if people have questions, or if they'd like a little help to understand something, or if they'd like me to point them in the direction of something else, like to other topics that are maybe touched on, so whether it's biology or philosophy or other things, I'm not writing about those, but I'm sufficiently familiar, and I can probably point people in a direction if they had an interest. But I try to align my understanding of these things as well, and I link them to a Quranic understanding. If I can just give you one example in relation to the universe. So there's been some interesting recent work, although I don't necessarily agree with a number of the assumptions of it. But there are some authors called Guillermo Gonzalez and J. Wesley Smith, and they wrote a book in 2004 called The Privileged Planet. The name kind of gives away a lot of the plot, but they also look at it from the wider perspective. And they came to a conclusion through a discussion throughout the book that this universe has been designed for 2 purposes. The first is to enable our existence. And the second is to enable our ability to understand the universe, which is very much in line then with the purpose that Allah would have done for it. Allah points us to the ayat, the evidences and proofs and indicators of his power and creation throughout the universe. And he has also created this planet, this life, for us as well. And it's possible to be in a planet that you can live on, but not be able to view the universe or to be able to discover and understand things. However, the universe has been so perfectly designed in order to enable both of these things. So this is like one of the examples of the kind of philosophies of science and also scientific studies or works that I gravitate towards. And I'm happy to point people at those things. Anyway, those are just my comments. Please, William, if you'd like to jump in, go ahead for it.
Great. William, did you have a comment?
Pardon me, yeah, more of a comment than a question. I absolutely agree that one of the most valuable things that any of us can offer each other is conversation, you know, and to not only encourage that, but I like the comment that you made earlier, that it's an actual absolute requirement, you know, that we be engaged this creation and engage each other, and be in an exchange of ideas, concepts, of perception. If there's anything that gives life to us, I think it would be that. You know, it would be the coming together of the minds of 2 human beings. You know, if there's a single purpose of human life, it would be to expand or to grow, to increase. And that happens best. Allah indicates to us that he creates everything in pairs. So us coming together in this process of engagement, as you called it, is essential. And I think that from what I've heard so far, this is my first introduction to you and your work. But from what I've heard so far, in terms of just the outline you've given of the books, the one you've already completed and the one that you're working on, it's certainly, to me, I think it's something that each one of us as learners, as instructors, definitely want to engage you in this process of conversation on an ongoing basis, so that we all can grow and so that we can all contribute ourselves and be able to share whatever it is that the law has uniquely granted each one of us, and our means of expression as well and contribution. So I just want to welcome you to our circle, and certainly hope that this exchange continues and grows from here.
And thank you very much for your comments. I mean, I certainly welcome the engagement interaction. I think it, from my perspective, I've found it to be very, very lacking, at least in circles and cities that I've been in.
Mm-hmm.
People tend not want to dedicate the mind space to considering ideas which may fundamentally challenge the comfortable relationships that they have in their
The common
societies and
narrative,
their networks and what have you.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I've just gotten used to living on that fringe, but a lot of people don't want to be there at all. This is the thing. A lot of people just want to live their lives. Fundamentally, they may just be a good person, but they don't have a lot of time to be thinking and analyzing and reflecting. And so they defer to authority and say, well, he knows better, so whatever, I'll just follow that. So I fundamentally hate that approach. There's one thing in life that's worth putting some effort in, and that is your relationship with the creator of the universe, and necessarily with the purpose of your very life. And when I've written these books, I don't care about the scholars. For me, the purpose, I wanted to make life easier for the average person by putting everything at the tip of their fingers. Every reference is there. I've linked them all up for you, wherever the person is reading it. It's all there for you. You can decide for yourself, and it doesn't take that long. Fundamentally, I don't like the idea of there being a class of so-called scholars, these anointed ones that have the right to tell you what is true and false, have the right to tell you what is right and wrong, and who people should rely on. That is not the purpose of it. There's a one-way relationship. There's a relationship with no intermediary, and that's with the creator.
Yes.
And the minimum you can do is apply your mind to it. And I think that the vast majority of people are really more than capable of being able to appreciate the fundamental truth of life. These books are my little effort to put something out there anybody can access. And if whoever you are, you're willing to put just a little bit of time, you'll have somebody who's taken the time to go through all of these verses and just put them in a place where it's just there. It's like on a plate. Somebody served you a dinner or lunch or whatever. You just need to want to eat it. But I have hopes and dreams with what will come out of these. In this book, I mentioned the chapter on money and the riba. I don't intend to just put that and leave it as it is. I think that Muslims worldwide should really be enormously concerned with the topic of so-called money. Where does it come from? Who is in charge of it? Should it be some centralized authority, or should it be some system whereby the people have that control? And so my hope is in the coming years is I would like to actually devise a system which can be run on a technological basis, which would enable a system of interchange, economic interchange for Muslims, which cannot be utilized in a riba-based system.
Yeah.
And the thing is, Muslims do not have that alternative, not very conveniently. You can do trade and barter. There are some things you can maybe hop onto. Some people think it's cryptocurrency. I happen to think that's not the case for various reasons. But if we don't like how it is now, and we have guidance which tells us we should avoid how it is now, let's make something better. And this chapter was my attempt to lay out as clearly as I could what is the Quranic guidance as it relates to economic matters. And this will then be the basis of a system I will try to work on. And my work is in itself very much research based and talking to experts and weaving together insights and ideas. And my intention is, once the foundation has been laid in terms of how should this system operate, my intention is to find experts around the world and see if we can make it happen. But that's just one of the outgrowths. I would love to be involved with educating people on the philosophy of science, how to actually see the real design and beauty in the world by taking the blinkers of materialism off. And I can give many examples of how that impacts people's analysis, from psychology, biology, to gender studies, to whatever. All of these things are poisoned by a truly nihilistic, materialistic, and I would say directly and intentionally anti-God philosophy. And a lot of people can't even see it. It's like the air we breathe, and it's like the water that a fish swims through. They cannot see it and all
Right.
the impact that it has.
Yes.
That's another area I'm trying to make some effort with. But as with all things, it's difficult. I'm going to make my effort, and I'll be happy with doing the best I can. The outcome is not in my hands. That's for God.
Indeed.
And I would love to have
It's
that
great. It's
that
great.
engagement with you. And I've had a particular interest in economics and finance, especially as it relates to the family life and how important
Mhm.
it is and essential it is in family life. So I spend a lot of my time and doing that kind of thinking and that kind of research. So I definitely would like to have conversations with you further about economics.
Sure. That'd be great.
Absolutely. Waliuddin, how are you, sir?
I'm fine, alhamdulillah.
Okay.
And
Have
I'm
you
truly,
been listening?
yes, sir. Yes,
Okay.
indeed.
You have a
I'm
question or a
tr-
comment
yeah,
about this?
I have two questions. The first question, I'm like both of you. I'm really excited about what I've heard and the extensive research on very, very vital topics. Uh, First, I have a question as it relates to the with the work on economic and finance. And one of the things that I've observed, there seems to be a definite um, attempt to lock people into waste. I'm just looking at, I noticed, particularly I'm here in Atlanta, and when they build these major structures, multifamily, structures, just about everyone not far from there, you'll find a self-storage, kind of facility. And it's just so much money that is being driven around, gearing people towards excess. So that's one of the things that just an observation. And I just wanted to comment on that. The other question that I had, I noticed in one of the chapters that you are working on as it relates to prayer, and
Yeah.
in your deep dive in the Quran, and I'm how do you define prayer? And because I'm trying to reconcile salat, as it's given in the Quran, and the translation that is often given as prayer. Could you comment on those two things for me? Thank you.
Okay, so two things. First being the relationship with current economics and waste. And the second thing being salah, its word and associated practice as we may observe from the Quran. So on the first one, an observation that I could share that is somewhat related to this system, and take this tentatively, is the current system is not just fiat currency, but it's creation of money out of thin air, quite literally. Sometimes there is a relationship with some supposed nugget of value and you can do a multiplier of it. However, that's not necessarily the case. There are some countries where you don't even have to have an original nugget of value before you multiply your currency out. Now, if you're able to print money all the time, one of the things that is linked to that is money is produced through a debt system. All money that's currently produced in society is created in order to enable debt. So, for example, if somebody gets a loan for a car or for a house or what have you, and because there is some sort of variable rates of interest to pay it back, more money needs to be created in order to facilitate that. So there's a continuous inflation in the supply of this fabricated currency. And linked to that continuous creation of this is the desire to push more and more people into purchase and debt. And then there's this kind of a cycle that's eating the value of the world through the through the production of fake money. And it's kind of necessarily a part of this system of creating money out of thin air. It's inflationary by design. And that's why your money from 10 years ago is worth less now, and it'll be even worth less in the future. The value that you have is stolen through the production of new money. Mm-hmm. This is what, when people hear inflation in the news, they just say, oh, I guess it's just this random economic thing that happens. No, it's not. Somebody has decided to print money out of thin air and devalue your money. They've stolen your money out of your bank account or wherever it is.
Yes.
So that's the comment on the first question. On the second question, this topic of salah in the Quran. If you don't mind, I'm going to take a slight background on this. I've looked at this from the perspective of people who try to follow predominantly the Quran and versus those who follow in the traditions of the Sunnis or the Shiites or otherwise. And I've heard every kind of theory and philosophy about it, that salah is in fact not a physical practice, that it's actually a connection, it's a relationship with God, or it's a system of life. I've heard all of these things. Personally, I interpret salah as a physical tripartite prayer. That is standing, bowing, and prostrating. And I've done an analysis of this. And I mean, if somebody wants to get in touch with me, I'm happy to just send this chapter. But as part of it, I decided, let me analyze this word salah, right? And I'm aware that in classical dictionaries, there are sometimes words where a meaning has been impacted by the arrival of the Muslim practice. So Arabic existed before, but after the advent of Islam, whether it's in the 1st century, 2nd century, and what have you, sometimes you'll see in these classical dictionaries that there are words where a shade of meaning has been given clearly after the advent of Islam, where somebody says, oh, it means this in relation to Muhammad or to Allah or to something or other. And you need to be careful when you're looking at that to kind of separate out what is a foundational meaning and what are some of the derived meanings that later came by. Now, when looking at this topic, I analyzed all of the ayat and separated out the various usages of this term and to the different ways it's used in the Quran. And it would take too long to go through all of them in detail. I'm happy to share this with you, but I'll give you some interesting insight. I decided to do an analysis of this word in a variety of related languages. So I looked at essentially Hebrew, Aramaic, Akkadian, Amharic, and Tigrinya. So these are somewhat related Semitic languages that you'll find all the way from the North Arabian Peninsula, all the way down to the base where you'd have Yemen, and going across the, I guess if you want to call it sea or port or whatever, into Western Africa and the languages there. And I had a look into their own dictionaries and classical dictionaries. So for example, Akkadian is no longer spoken, however it exists in language. And I went to the sources in all of these languages to find their words for prayer. And just as an aside here, the word salah has had a variety of kind of similar and derived meanings. So in the Arabic language, salah, some dictionaries separate it out, some of them combined, can mean to roast or to burn or what have you. And salah sometimes is used in relation to, they'll say, oh, it refers to the base of the back. some part of that lower part of your spine, and various other derived meanings, but also has the meaning of prayer. And I found that this meaning of prayer, and sometimes with the linked meanings of roasting and the lower back, can be found actually across all of the Semitic languages, quite interestingly. And I've recorded that with all the references as well. So this second book, in the same pattern as the first book, where it's of importance, I've created a dictionary section at the end to present and analyze all the evidence for particular words. And so I have done that for the word salah, and I have also done that for the word daraba, which has a variety of meanings in the Quran. And of course, some people like to point to 434. And
Yeah.
I've presented as rounded an analysis of that topic from a linguistic and Quranic approach in the same sense. So in summary, for your second question, I view salah as a physical practice, a tripartite prayer, where it's standing, bowing, prostrating, wherein you will recite of the reminder, because Allah says, Aqim salah li dhikri, establish prayer in order to bring me to remembrance, and in which you glorify and remember Allah in a humbly submissive manner. That would be the summary. If you have any more comment or detailed question or what have you, please.
Yeah,
let
the
me know.
idea about roasting is also an idea that's given in one of the ayah of Al-Quran. And a lot of people don't know that, but even if you look in Lane's lexicon, or even I think even Han's Word, you're going to find that there's a connection to the idea of roasting. So and those are meanings that go back into antiquity based on the language that you're looking at, that you're studying. But you mentioned something earlier. I'm trying to remember your exact words, but you'll understand when I put it this way, that we have overly depended on the scholars to tell us what things mean in the Quran. And we've done that to the extent that our brains have turned off to the, as Allah asked the question in the Quran, do they not yatadabbaru al-Quran? Do they not deeply ponder? And he's asking us to do that for a reason, so that we'll eventually be able to know the distinctions and the differences between what the truth is and what artificial inserts are. People think that most of the lies that we're experiencing, that we're calling Islam, are the residue of the many hadiths that have been perpetuated for all of these, 1,300 years now. But the Quran itself makes mention of the people of our prophet's day and time as having been involved in the twisting and the turning of and the manipulation of the words of the Quran itself. It didn't have to wait another 250 years or so before our hadith showed up in order to experience this level of misinterpretation. So the idea is, how do you get to or back to the original denotation? I think what we're dealing with in the world now are the connotations that have been added by so-called scholars to the words. But there has to be a denotation that was established by Allah, what I call the fitwa-based meaning, that will kind of trip the circuits of all of the foolishness and the misunderstandings, and some of them intentional, that have been added to these misreadings of what Allah is attempting to teach us. So no one I have heard who has spoken on the topic of the salat has included the idea that it can also mean to roast. And if so, then what is that roasting? What is that a reference to? And how did that meaning of roasting, which obviously is related to some animal on a skew or something, how is that related to the idea of what we now call prayer? I don't, when I think about prayer, I think about dua. And I don't think salat and dua, they're complementary, but they're not the same thing. So I have a problem with people who translate just willy-nilly that salat means prayer, as the word prayer is understood around the world. Some gesture, or some hand symbolism or something like that, and they say he just.
So are you differentiating here, just so I'm understanding you correctly?
Yes.
Are you saying you attempt to differentiate between the concept of salah and supplication, where supplication is like
Yes,
dua?
yes,
And so,
yes.
okay.
Yeah,
All right.
because most people don't. Most people, when you see the word dua in the Quran translated into English, it says prayer. You know, and then when you see salat, it says prayer. So how do you distinguish the difference, as you did in the beginning when you spoke about the difference between sadaqah and zakah, right? There's a difference, but most people think it's just giving somebody some money, and that's the limits of our investigation of that concept, because the leaders, quote unquote, told us that it means that, and therefore it means that, and we don't have enough time in our worldly lives, as hard as we have to work, to put in the kind of study that you or I would put in to really truly deep dive investigate these concepts. So we're stuck believing
Yeah.
daddy and granddaddy and our forefathers, you know, because they told us they had the time to study. They were in the masjid all day long, you know. So who are we to go against what they say?
Yeah. I mean, this is something. So my mentality is, I guess I'm absolutely incapable of being a follower in terms of any intellectual thing. I actually can't do it. And it doesn't matter how much discomfort that me. I would feel more discomfort.
What a fortunate man you are. A rarity. I tell all my
But
students,
yeah,
I say, do not call me any kind of leader. And do not call yourselves a follower of Benjamin Bilal or anything. I don't have any followers, right? And I'm not trying to lead anybody except my family. And if they buck me too
but
hard, they're on their own. So,
yeah,
you know, these things, these are the things that have gotten us into trouble in the world. Just assigning Idi Amin, you know, to be my, or whoever, you know, from whatever part of the world, even here in the current political, you know, thing that's going on now. I need for this man to be my leader. I need for this woman to be my leader. It's time for women to lead, you know, and these are people who can't even lead their families outside of a burning house with the door wide open. They couldn't do it because they're not understanding what these concepts mean in essence: to lead, to follow. These words are in the Quran, you know, but we don't investigate them long enough to know whether we should be participating in that level of followership or leadership. No, um, there are definitely people who have the particular kinds of qualities that are necessary for certain functions and for certain success at the end of the road. So they represent a level of guidance, but they are not leaders per se. And we're definitely not trying to encourage the kind of leadership where you believe a person, as well intentioned as they might be, believe them no matter what they say. See, that's the problem we're in today. If this leader said it, it must be true. If this leader went against it, he must be the enemy. And we have these kind of, you know, box kinds of ways of viewing the world. And or if black people said it, it's true. You know, if white man said it, it's gotta be wrong. You know, we have just kind of boxed ourselves in. You mentioned that concept of boxing in. And I think that the majority of the world has done that, you know, and it's caused us to run up against invisible walls, or I should say artificial walls, unnecessary walls.
Mhm.
And I think that's what's contributing to uh, the slowing down or maybe even the halting of our true human development being able to come in. I see it, I see the season for it here. But every time we turn to ask another so-called scholar, he gives us another wall as a part of that box, and we can't fight our way out of it. It's only a paper bag, but we still can't fight our way out of it. So we have to have a different orientation. And that's why I'm so happy, actually, for people like yourselves to make these kinds of presentations. I pray that we will stay in healthy touch with each other. We'd like to invite you back for a more structured, if you will, presentation. If you need to use PowerPoint, whatever, you know, whatever it is your standard way of presenting is, we'd love for you more sooner than later to make that kind of presentation. And I'm sure the people who listen to this regularly, they listen to our program regularly, and the people who are in our Sunday class every week, which is about 60 or 70 people we're averaging, you know, per week. it's really more of it. I call that an in-house kind of teaching session. I'm not really trying to reach thousands of people on YouTube. I'm not trying to get paid on YouTube because I want to be able to say what I want to say. And you want to block it and you want to take me down, that's fine with me, but I'm not in it for the financing that YouTube might be able to provide me. And therefore, they're going to be the ones to determine whether I say something or not say something, or be afraid to say something, or not mention a person that I need for you to listen to after you listen to this. I think we're kindred spirits in terms of that. Patricia Hamid, how are you, ma'am?
Alhamdulillah. I wanted to welcome him and thank him so much for his presentation. And I'm having difficulty with new Muslims who young people who have become Muslims. Just trying to talk to them about how to pray and what's correct and what's not correct, because we have all these different sects of Muslims now, and now we have a new growth with the Quranists or the number 19ers or the whatever they are, so it's just very difficult right now to communicate, the submitters, to communicate and determine how I'm going to talk to someone about al-Islam with so much misrepresentation of the deen because of the mistranslations of the Arabic. And it's just, well, anyway, alhamdulillah for you, and thank you so much for coming.
Sure. I mean, I'm going to share I'll share a link for people if they'd like to access
Yes.
the current book, but also my email address. If you particularly want just a structured presentation on that topic, I can just extract that chapter and send it before the book is complete, because I might need some more months, but I can send that off because I finished that part.
Please, we'd appreciate that.
Like it.
Yes, absolutely.
So just get in touch and let me know, and I'll send it to you.
All right. So Patricia, we'll put his information. Somebody racing cars outside somebody's door there. What's going on with that noise?
Yeah, I live
Is that
near
you?
a street,
Oh, okay.
busy
Okay.
street, so.
Well, we can't block you out. All right. But Patricia, you know what to do. We'll include this information in the drop-down box. Okay, so everybody will know how to get in touch with Marwan directly. And inshallah,
Sure.
we're going to have him back more sooner than later if his schedule permits, so that he can just do what he would normally do if he were in front of 100 people or more, and
Sure.
get to know him better. It's well worth our time and effort. Okay,
Thank you for the opportunity.
not a problem. All right, if there's anyone else out there in listener land, this is your last chance to chime in, ask a question, make a comment, or just give the greetings.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam, Kareem Abdul Salam. How are you? Go right ahead so we can hear you.
Yes, Marwan, I just want to thank you for what you shared with us this morning. I was especially pleased with your encouragement that people become independent thinkers and not just depend on someone else to think for them. That's one of the things that we were taught years ago, that man means mind. And in my understanding of that means that he's a thinker and that he should use all his abilities to think and think for himself as well as follow good guidance. So I appreciate you for your stand and on that, and all of the scholarly work that you've done to support that position. So I look forward to hearing more from you and learning more. Please keep doing what you're doing. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much for your comment. Alaikum assalam. Can I just make one last comment on
Sure.
my perspective of student and scholar? In the first book, I really represent myself as just a student. I think who decides what a scholar is? I guess it's been decided at some point for people, but I think if I was to define what is a scholar, it is somebody who dedicates time to learning and who tries to present information in the easiest way for other people. So what I try to do with this book is just present information in the most digestible way to the person who's on the receiving end. And a part of this is I had to design this book not for me, but for other people. The purpose of the messenger, which we should try to emulate, is al-balaghul mubin, the clear delivery. You have to know your audience, and you need to make the message as clear and honest and direct for the audience. And that's a lesson I had to get out of myself in the past. I had to realize everybody else is not like me, and I don't matter in this task. The task is to make it easy for other people. And I think a person who aims to be a student of the religion and who wishes to be of use to others should seek to make it as easy as possible for others. And I think people who are scholars, who are very well educated in certain areas, they should work to make themselves irrelevant. And what I mean by that is you don't act like you're some sort of vehicle of hidden knowledge that only you have access to. You should rather be the means by which everybody else has easy access to that knowledge, so that the day that you die, nothing has changed. The information is still there for people to access as they would like.
Indeed.
That is my goal, to become irrelevant to the people when it comes to the information.
Indeed. And I think that's also one of the purposes for this system of Nunetics, because it's pointing to the fitrah, it's not pointing to the scholar. And for as long as nature is here and available, as an object of study, then the system can be passed down, passed along, taught to others. As I said earlier, if each one of these letters represents a different part of the human body, when will it die? You can teach it to your 5-year-old. You don't have to wait for, high school and college and university to learn the system. All you have to do is be curious enough and interested enough in what Allah has created in you and around you. And that's the way to grow in this particular field. So it's not dependent on Benjamin Bilal, for sure. I've said that over and over again in my class. What I'm doing, if I drop dead tonight, it goes on because of the nature of the focus. And the focus is the fitrah. And how Allah did and does what he did and continues to do, so that we will continue to have more appreciation for his creation. That's the whole objective, to have more appreciation. Alhamd, right? Alhamdulillah, not Alhamdu Benjamin, Alhamdu, Marwan. No, none of us are the recipients of that level of praise and glorification. So we thank Allah. I'm going to leave you to whatever closing words you want to leave us with.
Sure. Two things. The first, I've got something for you, because you made a comment earlier that you hadn't seen somebody who dealt with what is the relationship between the meaning of roasting and prayer.
Yes.
So in my investigations, I did find somebody who did actually try to link those two. So I'm going to share that with you just for your interest.
Oh, please, yes.
So this is from Al-Raghib Al-Isfahani in his book Al-Mufradat fi Gharib al-Qur'an. So from 1109 from the Christian era, or whatever you want to call that. And he said, in his, I guess, theorizing, he said that the form of Salla is like that of Marrada. Marrada is to look after a sick person. And he says, Maruth is to be sick. So Marrada is to treat the sickness, and Marth is the sickness. And he said that Salah is to do something which makes you avoid the roasting. So Salah is, he has avoided the Salah. And that was his theorization from a linguistic perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just sharing that because you mentioned it earlier, you may find it interesting.
Yes.
The last thing is, I'm very grateful to have spoken to you, and to the other gentleman who's here, William, as well. Thank you for the opportunity, and I hope I can share something of use to you guys, and that maybe you can share that to other people. I'm happy to interact, and once you have the email, don't be a stranger. If there's a particular thing you want to point at, or you'd like to discuss, or maybe I'll have a presentation already prepared, or maybe I could create one. But I'm happy to share my ideas and thoughts, and happy to be corrected, happy to learn something new myself. This is not coming from any place of, trying to impose anything. I'm long past that. Allah has mentioned to the Prophet, you cannot change anybody. Allah is choosing not to change anybody. I don't expect to change anybody at all. For me, the goal is to do the clearest balagh, delivery of what I think to be correct. And then at the end point, people decide what they like with it. But happy to engage as always, and I'm very grateful for your graciousness and for your comments.
Yes. So if you have a free Sunday, where are you located?
In the United Kingdom.
Oh, okay,
London.
yeah. So we have several people who tune in from London. So normally our classes take place on Sundays at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, United States. So if you find yourself free in the next couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks from now, or whatever, that's the class that I would like to. That's the larger class, more international class that I'd like for you to address, if you will. We'd be honored to have
3
you.
p.m. on Sunday. Yeah, I think that time is certainly workable. Let me think about it. If you have any suggestions of what you might be interested in, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll make some suggestions and you can pick what you prefer.
Certainly. William, any last words?
No, again, I really appreciate the time and your heart, man, and your disposition towards knowledge and learning.
Yeah.
It's the kind of thing that's needed across the globe, and especially in this time of everything being in a state of transition right now. So this freedom of exchange is virtual, no attachment, to the information, and being just dedicated to giving your best, just showing up and giving your best. I think that's the time we're in right now. So again, thank you.
Yeah. Speaking of the time that we're in, I'd like to hear Marwan next time he comes, maybe address some of the current day issues in the world as we see them, address them from a Quranic perspective. In other words, what would be going on politically, economically, culturally, that kind of thing, but show us the real time connections, so that when we read the Quran, we can also see what's happening in the world, not just some history book, which it is not. We want it to be related to the things that are pragmatically in front of us that need to be figured out if we're going to live the kind of life that Allah intends for us to live, and not continue to see the Quran as some history book, which it is not. I repeat, it is not a history book. It's not a book that says that Jesus lived 2,000 years ago. Somebody else inserted that. It's not a book that says that Moses lived 5,000 years ago. So we've gotten caught up into too much of the so-called scholarship and too many of the fabricated Hadith to determine what the Quran is. We're determining what the Quran is based on fabricated information on the most part, when the Quran should be determining for you how to determine what is fabricated. Especially if Allah calls the Quran, the best hadith, Asanul hadith. What's all this other stuff? That's just my question.
Yeah, I understand. But I think it's a very good suggestion you're making. I think the second book is kind of closer to that, but I understand where you're coming from in terms of how would you apply this book as a criterion, as a guidance for these events.
Yes.
And I think that is actually an extremely critical thing. And it needs to be done in a simple and common sense way, not overly complicating things. And I think it can be done like that. So I think that's actually a great suggestion in terms of an example application could be one of the things that we do, right? Just pick a topic and say, here is the guidance, here's what's happening, how do we relate it to?
Great. Okay.
All
right. So thank you once again for being with us. May Allah continue to bless you, bless your family, bless whatever community members you have around you who are working with you. And may He make it easy on all of us to avoid the unnecessary pitfalls that sometimes just, being in a position to talk a lot might bring you. Sometimes we can talk so much until we forget what we're actually supposed to be talking about. And I'm looking at some gentlemen in front of me, and being highlighted by Marwan and what he has presented to us, that I believe we are pretty much on the right track And I'm feeling a level of sincerity from Marwan also, and I hope it's reciprocal, that will allow us to intercourse with each other more frequently in the future and bring bigger and better gems of ilm, of knowledge to the people who are listening. Even if they've not even finished grade school, they should still be able to listen to us and benefit from the knowledge or from the information. And I'm thankful we're all in that position to be able to present that to our listening public. So thank you once again. As I greet you in the greetings of peace that obligate each and every one of us to keep the peace. Salaam alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.